Welcome to Ideas, a time of conversation about all things board games. Community is built on conversations, and games are built on ideas.
Hey, my name is Brent. Welcome to Cloudy with the Chance of Meeples. Welcome to a fresh new set of ideas. If you're new to the channel, every month we sit down with whether it be game designers, artists, illustrators, publishers in the board gaming hobby and talk about how they got their ideas from just straight ideas into the games that fill our shelves endlessly and that we love to play. Today we have a special guest, always special, but today we have Rob Daviau. How's it going, Rob?
Good. I think I've reached the stage of veteran guest, right? Like in terms of like I've been around a while. So 25 years this week I've been a professional board game designer.
25 years. Wow. That's amazing. So let's jump in. Let's go back, whether you can remember some of that 25 years, but let's talk about growing up. What did like childhood look like? Were games always part of your childhood?
Yes and no. I mean, I grew up in Maine, in the 70s and into the 80s. And my mom liked board games. But very casual and still likes very casual board games. So I had a collection of sort of the classics that I played as a kid, and I would get games as a kid, and some of them I remember, many of them I don't. But they started to get a little more meat on the bones. It was a Star Wars electronic game that I got in 1978 or 79, maybe 1980. I still have the unit back there. It doesn't work. Mm-hmm. That had some teeth to it. But the big thing was when I went off to summer camp at age 11 in 1981 and discovered Dungeons and Dragons. That was like the real turning point, because here was a game that was endless and it's whatever you defined. And I fell in love with it. It's storytelling. I became the DM for my brothers and my friends. And then inevitably, especially with early D&D, I had to make up rules.
Right.
And I would just start making up rules on the fly to keep things going. And it was game design training.
Yeah. And you know what? It's fascinating. It's I've done a handful of these interviews now, and so many designers bring back to D&D. I didn't grow up playing D&D, but so many said, I've asked, like, what initially got you into the hobby? And they're like, you know what? One time I played D&D, and that kind of just like sparked a creative spark of imagination or whatever. And
yeah. Well, it's a game that obviously encourages imagination, but if you think about it, in the early 80s, you either had Parker Brothers or Milton Bradley or some other type of games like that, which we're going to have maybe some medium weight games, but it was going to be lighter and medium, or you had hex-based war games or chess or things like that. There wasn't a middle ground of most of the games that I see behind you. There weren't these medium to heavy games. Board games just weren't in that place. So if you're of a certain age, I'm 53. So if you're somewhere between like 45 and 55, the only way that you were going to find something that was sort of this middle weight and an open sandbox was role-playing games. Like that was all there was.
Right. So what are you playing these days? Do you have time to play other games, or do you just play games that you're designing and creating?
I try not to just play games I'm designing and creating. I mean, I'm involved with board games, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours a day during the day. So sometimes in the evening, I don't want to play a board game. What I try to do is play role-playing games still, because I don't work in role-playing games, or I play games on my phone.
Okay.
If I'm going to play games. But I do still play games, not as many games as people who don't do it full-time do. Like I meet people and they're like, oh, I played, 70 new games last year. I'm like, I played 5. Right. And sometimes I'll go back to games that I like, but I want to keep an eye on. I want to see what the industry's doing. I want to see what other people are doing, and I still enjoy it. So it's when I play other games, it's a mix between just enjoyment, especially if it's a game I know I like and I go back to and I say, oh, I'm going to play this because I just like it, versus what's new, what came out, what's hot on BGG, what came out at Essen, what was the thing at Gen Con. And then it's a little bit more playing it to see what people like. Even though I might play a game like, well, I wouldn't normally play this. It's not my type of game, but professionally, I should know what's about.
Right. So do you have, like, as an adult and as a seasoned veteran in this hobby, do you have a favorite game, whether it be one from, maybe it is D&D in general, or do you like have like a game where if you're like, it's kind of like comfort food to you, be like, you know what, I want to go back and I want to play game X because I just love that game so much. Do you have a favorite game?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the D&D talk, but what I like is playing old school style, meaning like based on first edition AD&D or basic or expert D&D, like a dungeon crawler. Like if I want comfort food, if I want to feel like a kid again and just get joy, that's the style of game I'm going to play. And actually, next weekend and then the weekend after, which will be week after Thanksgiving, another friend and I, we're about the same age, are going to get together and just do like a Sunday day like role playing thing.
Yeah.
For board games, there's games I played with my kids when they were growing up.
Yeah.
That I enjoy and they have a fond memory. There's games that I have good experiences around. There's games I'll return to, but games are like meals where you're like, what do you want for dinner? And it's just, at least for me, I want a whole bunch of different things. But the games I tend to like tend to be medium weight or lighter. Like, although I do like, I'm looking behind you, Lost Ruins of Arnak. That's, a heavier game for me.
Okay.
And I like games that tell a story.
Yeah.
Have some sort of narrative.
You mentioned your kids, you played games with your kids and now your kids are grown. Did your kids enjoy playing games with you growing up, or did you kind of like rope them in? My kids are 7 and 10, and I think they enjoy playing games to a degree. Like they do. My son does. But sometimes they're like, dad really likes this. Let's play game XYZ or whatever the case is. But like, do your kids have a love and passion for games much like you do?
They like games more than I think the average person their age are 24 and 20.
Okay.
And they know more about games. And we did play them when they were younger. And then they got to be teens. And very naturally, they're like kind of wanted to not do dad's thing as much. And I never tried to force it on them. Mm-hmm. And a couple times when they got old enough to feel like they could play test, I play tested. And it just didn't work out because like they didn't want to disappoint me. And I didn't want to like bore them and stuff. And so after a couple tries of play testing as a family, I'm like, okay, this isn't going to work, or it's not going to work when you're like 15 and 11.
Right.
I think I could sit down with them now and play test a game, but they're not right around the corner. One's in college and another one was like an hour and a half away. So they do like games, but I never tried to make my job or my hobby their thing. We did play D&D, would be pancakes and D&D with dad when we were younger. And we did that for a bit and they liked it. And then they just went like, no, that's your thing. And now my son plays D&D in college. So
right on.
It's the usual mixed bag of wanting to be wanting to do with stuff with your parents and what your parents like, and also wanting to be your own person. Like it was a perfectly normal blend.
Right on. So what or is game design still fun for you? You say you've been in this hobby now 25 years. Is it still fun, or kind of like what you say, so you said sometimes you're like game designing like 4 to 8 hours a day and you go home and you're like, I don't want to do that because it's now a job, right?
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting when you do it full time. If you do anything full time, the job comes with it, meaning that there's emails and contracts and notes. And I have to put an eye towards, hey, I want to work on this game. It's going to take up so much of my brain space. I can do some passion projects that don't make a lot of money, but I can't do all passion projects.
Right.
I need to sort of look and say, this is a reasonable investment of my time. And what do I think I'll get in return? And sometimes I make more and sometimes I make less. So at least I start applying different metrics to game design. But when I actually get down to making a game, when I have an idea or a playtest works, that joy doesn't go away. And the disappointment of a playtest not working doesn't go away. So there's like this core of actual game design that's still fun and better than working and everything. It's surrounded by the natural things that you do when you have an office job.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit about your games real quick. Restoration games. I'm just curious, do you have anything more for Downforce coming out? Is Downforce like finished? I know there was a couple other tracks.
It was kind of finished. We were kind of letting it play out. It had its time. There's a chance we're going to do something new on it. Like that, we have a lot of candidates, and there had been nothing on the candidate list. So if you had asked me 2 months ago, I would have said no. And now I'm saying possibly.
Okay,
but I don't really know.
I know my kids. My kids enjoy
that game. They do.
Yeah. I got the small. I guess this is the smaller version, right?
Yeah, that was the one we put it into Target for a little bit, and it didn't really catch on. So, we were hoping to get a wider audience for it, and it just didn't work out for some reason. That speaking of playing with the kids, there was a game called Daytona 500, which was an earlier version of Downforce. It's had many iterations. And I used to play it with my kids when they were younger. When they were real young, we wouldn't even play by the rules, like where you get cards and you play new cards. Instead, we would it was a watch me. We'd flip the top card of the deck, and then they would count and they would move them when they were real young. And we would just start getting excited. I think red's going to win. I think green's okay. We all have to pick a different car. And there was no control, and you were just sort of rooting for it. And so that had a special nostalgia for me. So when Justin and I started Restoration Games, we were looking at games. I said, I have a game that just makes me happy because, I played it with my kids. Let's take a look at that. And it became Downforce.
That's awesome. I love hearing stories like that. And I think others love hearing things like that, that the memories that are created with just cardboard and paper, you know what I mean? Like just endless memories that we can share with others.
Oh, that's why I do it. I mean, at the end of the day, and that's why it took me a while, but I can to rip things up or change things in a legacy game, which is very disruptive because games are supposed to be sort of pristine or at the end of the day, the cardboard doesn't matter. It's the memories that matter.
Yeah.
And you can make really powerful memories by actually getting rid of changing the cardboard and the cards that are inside. The memories of doing that are going to be more powerful than the actual piece of cardboard. It's just a pizza box with better graphics. If you want to strip away all its heart, but it's the stuff that is inside that makes it special.
That actually it dovetails perfectly into my next question, because I was gonna move into this genre that you started, which is the legacy game. And back, I guess, a dozen years ago, when you started working on Risk Legacy, how was that pitch to the publisher to be like, hey, I have this idea for a game that's not a campaign game, but in a sense it kind of is, but it's going to change and you're going to rip things up. How did you pitch that? Well, like, what were reactions when you brought forth that idea?
Well, it's the second time I pitched. I tried to pitch it as a Clue game first, and I got a lot of, I don't know what the hell this is, but no.
Okay.
I was in-house at Hasbro, so I couldn't shop it around, right? I had to go up to management rather than over to a publisher. And then when I did it with Risk and I got into it, I thought, I really think there's something here. And Risk is the most grown-up brand of like the core Hasbro line. So if we're going to do it anywhere, this would be a chance to do it. And I had been at Hasbro for 11 years or so when I pitched it. So I kind of knew how the sausage was made.
Right.
So, and then I made the presentation of my lifetime. I just remember the last line because Hasbro at the time kept saying, we want to be game changers. We want to be game changers. And I finally say, I hear a lot of talk about us being game changers, but if you want to be game changers, you need to be able to change the game.
It's like mic drop.
Yeah. And I talked about, you can't take things back in life. I remember getting up there and saying some things that you make choices every day in your life. Maybe you put on a particular shirt, and you don't think much about it. And then someone compliments you on your shirt, and then you end up marrying that person. And you think back later, you say, my goodness, what if I didn't have that shirt on? What would my life, and you can't take it back. I said, I could go over, and I said to the president of the company, I go over and punch you in the face right now. And I said, I will be fired and I won't work here anymore. And I can't say, oh, I was just trying something. And I said, but in games, you try something, but they never have consequences. And when you play poker for no money, it doesn't count. And I said, things change. Everyone buys a leather jacket and everyone wears it differently. And I was just going on. I still remember it, I guess, a lot. And he got to the end and the president said, I'm going to admit, I don't understand exactly what this game is going to be like, but I understand that you have an idea for something big and different. And I want you to do this game the way you want. And he looked around everyone. He's like, don't let these people Hasbroize it. Don't make it safe. Just go. And he kind of put like this protective shield around me so I could make it. Now, then with politics, he ended up like getting ousted due to internal stuff. And the new people came in. There's a whole story. I could write, like, if not a book, a pretty long article about how I had to sneak this through the system to come out because it died like 4 or 5 times. And I was ready. I was actually ready to say, okay, if this is killed, I was going to go to the people in charge and say, I'm going to quit and I want to make this game on my own and I'll pay you a royalty. Either way, I'm going to quit and go make a legacy game,
Mhm.
but let's figure out how to make this work. So I was fully prepared to leave my job to make this game come out, or another legacy game.
That's fantastic. I think you could write a book, and I think a lot of people would like love to read that. Just saying that because I love hearing things like that. Like there's so much life in all these games, and we just throw them on the table, and often we throw them on the table, and we're like, oh, I didn't click, it was terrible. Or you play once, you're like, oh, that's awesome. But there's so much more that goes into everything that's in one of these boxes behind me.
Oh my
Um,
goodness, I can't even tell you the amount of thinking. Hopefully, some people do it more than others, but thinking that goes on from the rule books to the graphics to the box sides to the vac tray to there's so many decisions that get made.
yeah. And speaking of rules, let's talk about legacy games in general, I guess. And I want to obviously talk about your latest one, Ticket to Ride. Um, but I'm currently going through Sagrada Legacy or Sagrada Artisans, which is a legacy game. And how important is it to get the rules right? How much more important? And maybe it's always important to get the rules right, but how important is that whole rules editing and all that stuff in legacy games compared to an unmatched something else that you've designed or something else? Because you have X amount of games, and honestly, as a player and a consumer of these, sometimes I'm nervous playing a legacy game because if I'm playing, a 12 game campaign and I mess up on something small in 3, that's gonna not derail, but potentially
It's
that's
going to snowball, right?
yeah,
It's
it's
going to,
gonna
right? If you get
snowball.
five games in and you're like, oh, but I can't go back, and we've already changed it. I understand the concern, and I do a lot of legacy games with Matt Leacock, and we are very, very diligent
Mm-hmm.
to try to handhold people. Like there is a lot of extra words and pictures in our legacy games,
Yep.
and we try to spread out rules so you're not learning too many at once. So, for example, when you end a legacy game, oftentimes there's a little bit of end game stuff you do, whether it's flavor or changing some things.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe you roll right into the next game, or maybe it's a couple months and then you start the next game. But realistically, everything that happens between the end of one game and the beginning of the next game is the same space, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's the space between games. But Matt and I are very careful that we introduce nothing new at the end of a game. You do what you've already done, and maybe we narratively give you a cliffhanger so you want to play the next game.
Mm-hmm.
But we make sure that you don't learn any new rules at the end of one game, because we know it might be weeks or months before you play it and you'll forget them. And we try to do it at the beginning of the next game, even though realistically it's the same space in the cycle.
Yeah.
We we're talking, what were we talking? Some Gen Con. We were talking about Ticket to Ride, and we were talking about this exact thing, and we thought of a better way to do it. So if we do another game, it'll be in there, because oftentimes we do flavor text and then here are the rules, right? So you read some flavor text and it's add sticker F and sticker G and open this card, and they're disconnected. And we were talking about how it would make more sense to put them together.
Mm-hmm.
So say something like, the volcano erupts and now there's lava flowing down the mountain. Add rule F to the rule book, and that talks about lava flow. So you read the narrative, and now and then do flavor, do a rule, do flavor. So every time they connect better, rather than reading 3 paragraphs and then putting 4 rules in.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always looking to improve, but yes, very, very concerned about that. And we watch a lot of playtest videos, and the actual stuff that's happening in the game is important, but it's the least important thing. We watch end of games, beginning of games, rules confusion, people reading out loud. How does it sound? Like we get videos of people playing, and almost everything we're watching for is confusion around new rules rather than the actual gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that just kind of like that changes the way you almost design, does it not? Like designing something like a Ticket to Ride Legacy or Risk Legacy or any of these other legacy, like the Pandemic, all these things. Game design, is it different? Like how different is it compared to something like an unmatched?
It's different. I've been doing it long enough that I have to like sort of stop and think how it's different. There's
Mm-hmm.
more there's more care about the connective tissue, right? Like if you're playing unmatched and you're like, I don't really know how this card should work. You just kind of play it. Maybe you look it up. Maybe you email us. And then you later on, if you play it again, you're like, oh, we got that wrong.
Mhm.
It's no big deal. It was a 25-minute game. But if you get a rule wrong in, like you said, game 2 of a 12-game series, and you get to game 6, you really feel like you've wasted your time and your money,
Mhm.
and you're mad about it. So, it's kind of like a recipe. You don't want to get to the end about, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, no, wait, hold on. I was supposed to add butter. Well, too late. It's going in the oven.
Right.
Right. Like it's kind of ruined at that point. But at the end of the day, also we also talk about things like big rules and little rules in all games. I do.
Right.
When we're working on rules and we say, or a card, and I say, yeah, what would happen if you played this wrong? Right. The restoration team are like, you could read it this way. Or like, yeah, you'd have to work hard to read it this way. But what if you did? What if you interpret this card a different way? And we go, yeah, it really wouldn't break it. It would just make it different. It would make it a little more powerful, but not a big deal. And then there's other rules where you go, oh, hey, if you play this wrong or you miss this, the game doesn't work. Not all rules are equal.
Right.
So we try to draw more attention to the ones like, these are the critical ones you need to know. And if you mess these up, we don't want you to. We want to be perfect, but you're going to play the game. It just might be a little wobbly.
How was like playtesting this, because you worked with Matt Leacock and Alnar Moon, and this legacy game plays, and now I'm speaking of Ticket to Ride Legacy, which has been getting a lot of buzz. I'm excited to play it. I love Ticket to Ride, so when I heard about legacy version, I was like, sign me up, right? But it plays 2 to 5. Did you have like, how many playtesting groups did you do? Because you have 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 different player accounts that can do this. How do you even do it? Like, okay, in a 2-player game, catch up mechanism like this, and a 3-player game, you obviously have the same thing, but then to bring them all together, like I'm trying to wrap my mind around how smart you guys are and how dumb I am when it comes to this.
Well, I'm sure there's mistakes in there. It's a big game. Actually, in fact, there's already like an errata that we realize as people, like there's so many moving parts. So the Days of Wonder is going to be, some things we're either going to tweak in a reprint to make it a little clearer, or things that like there's one section where, if you do this on this card and you do this on this card, like the game can, it doesn't break, but it can end up like a little subsystem that's supposed to go away. It can overstay its welcome, like stuff like that. Like you get more playtesting done in the first day a game is out than the entire time you're making a game. You just know that. So that's when you find out your typos, you find out your mistakes, you find out your balance problems. And that's just part of game design. So at some point I never like it, but I get used to it. Legacy game testing, I've tried to do quantitative testing. Where you just get a bunch of games and people rate things and stuff like that, and it just doesn't work. It's an experience. So we do qualitative testing. So we do a handful of different versions. Like like with Ticket to Ride, we'll internally play the first 3 or 4 games ourselves, just with friends, just to make sure that the general idea is working. And then at some point we give it to people, and it's often not done. We say, hey, we have the first 5 or 6 games, and we'll watch all the videos and we'll fix those 5 or 6 games, and we'll tweak and we'll refine, and then we'll build out a little more and build out a little more until finally the whole campaign's there. And when we do those, we had 3 designers, so we'll send them to 3. Each of us picks a group and watches that group and takes down notes, and then we get together, or sometimes we mix it up. Like I'll watch games 1, 2, and 3 of Group A, and then 4, 5, and 6 of Group B. So you're not watching the same people. And then we get together and compare notes, and we look for commonalities. Like everyone was confused about this rule, or this overstayed its welcome, or this led to a runaway leader problem. And we make sure those groups have a, like one time it might be a 3-player and a 5-player. Next time it's a 2-player, 4-player, and a 3-player. We start looking for, is there problems? Well, we saw this in the 2-player game, but we didn't see it in the 5-player game. Does it need fixing? Is it a big deal? But there's just no way with a legacy game to get like 500 playtests.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Yeah. But I so far, I don't know if you need them. It makes me nervous, but by and large, this system works.
did you have the concept? Who came up with kind of the story? Did you guys all come up with the story? Did you have obviously a potentially a starting point, and hey, we should get it to this point? Or it was like, hey, let's start with this and see what happens. And all of a sudden, like you said, we have 5 games in. We don't have an end game finish
Um,
line yet. Like, how did that work? Or how did it work in this case?
it changes for each game. Like I did Betrayal at House on the Hill Legacy. Betrayal. His story was almost first in that.
Okay.
Right. What's the story? Who's the main character? What's the story we want to tell here? Because it's a very narrative game,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of framing it out. With all the Pandemic games, it was a mix of what are some mechanisms we can use and what's the story, and we went back and forth. With Ticket to Ride, it was mostly mechanisms first, and we were almost done, and we thought it's a little dry. And I think it was me saying, I think we need a narrative through point. I think we need like an ongoing story. It doesn't have to be deep, right? It's not, we're not going to tell a novel, but it just needs to be enough to comic book level to make you, some characters to care about, some ongoing story.
Mm-hmm.
And that really sort of tied the game together. I tend to advocate for narrative more, and I think there's the conception that like on Pandemic that I like wrote all the story and Matt did all the game design, which is not true. We went back and forth on both, right? We would both think of ideas and trade, and I get down in the weeds with the mechanisms, and Alan and Matt came up with story ideas as well. It's no surprise if you open Ticket to Ride Legacy, you can see a whole bunch of boxes that you're going to open of different regions, and I think that each of us took point on different ones. Like, oh, that one sounds fun, I'll do that one. Right. So if you open a box, there's a designer who is sort of the lead designer on that, and then we all played around and reacted to what the other person did. But it's different every time.
Right. Was this a passion project? You may mention earlier about some things can be passion projects and some can be, hey, I want to like legitimately work on this because I want to make money. Like, and you want to make money on all the accounts, right?
Yeah,
But
I'd
sometimes
like to pay my bills, right?
Exactly.
If I can't pay my bills, then I need to go get a different job, and then I can only make like one game a year on the side.
Right.
This was an intersection of three things. I wanted to work with Alan, and I wanted to work on the Ticket to Ride brand because I think it's a cool brand.
Mm-hmm.
It is a passion project because I thought it would be fun, and I thought it would make some money. We're splitting a royalty 3 ways, so I don't think, unless this thing takes off and goes reprint after reprint after reprint, I think it'll make a okay amount of money. But this was not a big money maker, and it was not a big passion. It was just a little bit of each. Like, hey, this sounds fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it will make enough money to justify my time.
Right. So do you have any future plans in the legacy realm? Or is there anything you can talk about of upcoming things that you're working on?
I did finish up a relatively, it's more of a mainstream family style legacy game that will be out in the next year or two. Maybe. I've had stuff die at this point, even when you think you're done.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happened is that as Ticket to Ride Legacy has come out and gotten good reviews, and people see this as still a genre that has some legs to it. I've gotten a number of inquiries over the past couple of weeks about starting new ones. But not all of them will become projects. Not all of them will finish, and they will come out at different times. So we're looking at 2 to 4 years from now for some new ones to come out.
Yeah. Did Alan and Matt come to you, or how did you guys like connect up for Ticket to Ride Legacy?
Alan came to Matt and me. He had played. Alan's a big fan of the Pandemic Legacy series. I think he said Season 0 was his favorite game of all time.
Okay.
But we had started on this before that came out, so it's somewhere between. Pandemic Legacy came out and it went to the top of the BGG charts. I think a number of publishers were like, ooh, let's make one of these. They're trickier than they seem to be. So I think, some came out and some didn't. A number of people had said to Alan, you should make a Ticket to Ride Legacy. And he sort of tried it a little bit and got in the weeds. And then he said, well, if I'm going to do this with someone, I might as well go to the people who make the legacy games I like. So he approached Matt and me a long time ago now, like 2016.
Wow.
2017. And Matt and I were finishing up Season 2 of Pandemic Legacy. So we said we need like a couple months to finish that before we start a new one. So I think we started in 2017. And we worked on it at a pretty stately pace. Like here's where it wasn't like a money project, because we just sort of took our time. Someone's
Right.
going on vacation, we just take time off. Like if people are on other projects, we take a month off. Like this wasn't a get it done project.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had, COVID. So we finished about 2.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But then the cost of goods was way up, freight and shipping and paper and everything like that. And so that was the Days of Wonder was sort of taking their time to get all the localization, get the other markets on board, get the translations right, get the manufacturing right. And so that took a little longer than usual because it's a big game and it's complicated. And there was all these post-pandemic issues in the industry. So
Right.
this game ended up taking 7 years from beginning to end, which is long. I've
Right.
had games, the shortest one I've done is like 4 months. Like at Hasbro or something, like where you can just rush it. Realistically, when you start a project till it's out, it's 18 months to 36 months.
It's still mind-boggling that you've been working on this that long and yet nothing was necessarily leaked in this day and age where, like, social media and all that stuff. Like, I had not heard anything of it until this year, and yet you guys say you finished it up like 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, you try, because what happens if, let's say, people knew we were working on it in 2019, and then it's out now, people would be like, I thought that came out years ago. I thought it died. I bet there was something wrong with it. Why did it take so long? Like you just, you get excited and then you get annoyed that it's not out, and then you forget about it. And then when it comes out, you're almost annoyed again because you were like, I was excited 2 years ago. So there's I think, and there's so many games coming out. I think there's a real, it's like a good idea. Don't talk about your game until it's on the ship.
Yeah. Right on. So as we wrap up, real quick, is there anything, what are you guys working on with Restoration Games?
We're working on a number of things. I mean, you can see right behind me, I get Ticket to Ride Legacy, but I also have Unmatched Adventures, which just came out, which is a cooperative version of Unmatched.
Okay.
They both came at the same time. They're both getting sort of good reviews. We're continuing with the Unmatched line in a couple of different ways. Okay. That's proving to be a tough nut to crack, so that's many years out. And then we get some other surprises. Like I said, don't talk about it until it's on the boat. But
exactly.
We've got, some small games and some Kickstarter games and some different plans and some continuations of, lines, things in our line, and some new ideas that we aren't working on. Restoration, past couple of years, have been taking up about 80% of my time. So I've been mostly trying to get that business in place. Mm-hmm. Where, because I've been doing stuff that's not just creative directing, which I like, not just designing. I've been, business development, things like that. But I think we have the right people in the plants now where I can spend less time doing that, which is going to free me up to do more things that aren't restoration. So I'm really excited over the next handful of years. I'm also getting to this weird point where I go, okay, when do I retire? How many more games do I want to make? I mean, I'll probably still make games, but at what point am I making games where it's not money? It's just fun. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make one game this year.
Yeah.
It's not tomorrow and it's not soon, but given how long it takes to make games, like all of a sudden you're like, oh no, I don't like that. I like being a young Turk, not a white bearded veteran. But it happens.
Yeah. Right on. Well, thanks so much for taking this time. Of course, if you want to know more about Rob's stuff, Restoration Games, you have a website, right? robdaviau.com.
That's it.
Man, I said it. Did I say it right again?
You said it right again. But you just reminded me, I haven't looked at that website in like 6 months. I got to go check to make sure it's relatively up to date.
Okay. Wow. I'm 2 for 2. I'm not going to say your last name again because, well, I'm just going to end on a high note, but I just want to thank you so much for taking the time. I truly believe that community is built on conversation, just like games are built on ideas. And that's what I try to bring in this segment, that we can just find out about how your ideas came into these things that we absolutely love. So again, thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah.
And if you want to know more, Cloudy with Chance of Meeples, we're on Facebook, Cloudy with Chance of Meeples. Until next time, grab your umbrella. The forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember to grab your umbrella because the forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.